Hi, this is Stephen Conradi here, and I'm here for the first ever review of Christie's Deep Space Syndicate album, Deep Space Syndicate. This was released sometime in March of 2003. I don't know. You'd have to go do a wiki on it. This is their let's see, fifth major label studio album, and this was also around the time there were some big changes going on, mainly changes going on in Universal Music. So around the time in '97 they were signed to Polydor Records, and there was that big merger where Polydor, which was part of, or not Polygram, Polydor, which was part of the Polygram family of labels. They that label ended up folding into Universal Music. So around that time, I guess the band had to come up with their own label. So this is their first release under their own label called Majestic Ring. So around that time also, you still had all 5 members of the band. This pretty much became to be the last album that Koji, their second guitarist, was on. Other than that, he'd been on all their previous works, and he was with the band from, not from the beginning, but from their earliest days. So what happened was around 2005 or so, when Lacrima had recorded, I guess they finished recording Zeus, and then were trying to promote that record. What happened was Koji ended up leaving Lacrima around that time, and just abruptly left during a live, and or after a live, and so that left Lacrima. That made they ended up deciding to become a 4-piece instead of a 5-piece, and that both guitarists are very fundamental to this band. And the reason why I say this is because both of the guitars were dual leads. Like they were both lead guitar players. There wasn't a rhythm, there wasn't a lead, there wasn't, like on my last video I had mentioned, there wasn't any distinctions between rhythm and lead. It was just, a lead part here, a lead part there, a little rhythm part here. It was pretty much sporadic all over the place, but this formula it worked for the band. And when Koji left, there were a lot of issues. It's just, like I said before in the last video, the band sounded very hollow without Koji, and because there wasn't another guitarist to fill that void of those solos that were being played, or those parts, because you had to have the 2 parts to complement together to fit in the song. I think, if I was in that band, and if I was, in Hero's shoes in that band, I would say, hey, let's just audition another guitar player. I would have been like, let's take a break. We've got a few singles here and there. Let's just call a hiatus, take a year break, and go ahead and figure out what we want to do as a band. and maybe possibly audition for another guitarist, and then at least come back out after those few singles and the hiatus, and then announce that, you know, you have a new guitarist. And maybe if you added a different another guitar player, that would have at least given some more flavor to the band, or something different and unique. But, you know, alas, they just decided to do, this is what they decided to do. They continued as a 4-piece. And I've watched some of their live clips without Koji on guitar, and with just Hiro. And the parts are all there, or Hiro's parts are there. He just played his own parts, but Koji's parts are missing because there's nobody else to play it. He's just gone. So, that being said, that's kind of when I stopped listening to the band, is like right after they left, that Koji left. I was like, I wasn't interested in any of their other albums after that. And I think a lot of times it's, you know, it's very difficult for bands to continue on if they're not going to be in any sort of form of agreement with each other. Anywho, back to the review. That was my attention spiel. So this is the last album with Koji. So overall, I'm going to do kind of a interesting rating system. Rating overall, packaging plus material, source material. So this, you know, this album comes with a nice, I believe that there were limited editions to this album, as to where, like, they had different colored jewel cases and stuff like that, which is pretty neat. This came in a red jewel case. It was produced by the band itself, by LaCroix. This is one of their first few albums that was self-produced. They had 1 or 2 tracks that were, I think, produced by another person, another arranger, or produced by Maso Akashi. So I'm just reading the forgive me, I'm just reading the backliner notes. So, which was Hiramiki. So this album had several hits, several singles. I'm not sure where they were at in the time of the Oricon charts. If you're that nerdy, you can go look that shit up. But they released the single Groove Weapon and Hiramiki. And those 2 singles are pretty popular. This album is pretty much LaCroix at its poppiest, and the mix, it's also mixed by Koji. Koji did some mixing on several different tracks on this album, and the way it's mixed is rather interesting. It's very kind of dark, kind of warm, but I think around this time Koji was just trying to start getting into mixing. He started doing it on their previous album, And You, which was released a year earlier in 2002. So the mixing is rather so-so. I don't really care for how this album was mixed. It could have been mixed a little bit better, in my opinion. But let's see, tracks 7, 8, and 9 were mixed or engineered by Masao Akashi. It has this weird, like, everything kind of sounds a bit darker. It almost sounds some of the tracks sound like they're more up front, and there's more this up close sound production rather than everything's kind of spaced out or in a sense to your ears. I don't know, just that's how it is to my ears. But other than that, I mean, this album is a pretty decent album for what it is. And it being their last album, being Koji's last album with the band, it's not really their strongest, I don't think. And it's a rather short album. So you start off with the intro track, which is this kind of a bleepy, bloopy, keyboardy thing, I guess, that Koji came up with. Interesting, fair enough, it's okay. It's not... They could have just easily left that out, the intro out. Could have easily opened with Mystical Glider. That was a pretty good track. I liked it. I think that was another single of theirs as well. So you had like 3 singles on this album. Mystical Glider is a pretty good track. It's got... It's not really their best track, honestly. It's okay. It's not really that great. Just the arrangement on it, everything. Groove Weapon is kind of this kooky, kind of poppy track that has like these... opens with these like acoustic kind of... opens with a really cool solo thing done by Koji or Hiro, I suppose, and then it's got this kind of goofy, kind of poppy acoustic thing with hand claps, and it's a very happy track. It's kind of a... it wasn't what I expected it to be at first. Deep Space Syndicate, that track, okay, they could have easily left it out, honestly. I don't know, it's more of a disco-y kind of vibe. They've got this... I don't know if or not, one of the members was listening to a lot of Sugizo at the time, like his works, because a lot of Sugizo's works has this, his solo stuff has this kind of like very clean guitar riff, kind of disco funk thing going on. And it's kind of a goofy track, but it's okay. I mean, it's still, the whole point of it is that most of these songs, about 99.9% of these songs are still very catchy and very hookable, even though they're not that strong. But I think as you go further down the album, Vampire Circus is a pretty decent track. Surrealism. Simply Red has this like goofy, like, it's just, they could have left that one out. Regal Tiger Revolver was pretty good. Hiramiki is a very solid, catchy pop tune. Haven is kind of like a short track. It's barely even noticeable. and then Reverse is probably the best track on this album, IMO. So you have just a lot of different elements to this record. Again, it's not their strongest by any means. It's a decent album for what it is. I appreciate what they're trying to do here. They're basically saying, hey, look, you know, this is pop's dominating the market. We've got to kind of be more pop oriented, as opposed to the previous records were more progressive, more jazz oriented. This is more pop based, more of a pop based record. So this was also 2003 was also an interesting year for Visual-kei. It was around the time as to when a lot of bands were Visual-kei had started to kind of become irrelevant by that point. Like 2003 was pretty much the cutoff year for good Visual-kei bands. The last great Visual-kei band of like the last maybe 10 years or so has got to be 10 or 15 years or so has got to be Kagero. They were, Kagero were the last great VK band, but that was just at a time when it started, you know, just kind of branching off into different territory, and the tide is kind of still needing to change, but it seems like, you know, it's kind of going around in a cycle of everything's kind of repeating itself as far as, you know, sound and style wise, and a lot of these newer bands are just copying off from each other, and they're just sounding exactly the same and not willing to try anything different. So I think with this album, they were probably trying to try at least something different. Pretty solid album overall, very singable. Everything's catchy. Like, the lyrics are catchy. I still catch myself singing some songs in the shower or whatever. But it's a decent album. I'd say it's not wonderful. It's not like the previous albums. It's not Sculpture of Time. That album probably has to be hands down the best LaCroix album there is. Their major label debut just went off with a bang, and then, you know, followed up by Lhasa. Those are probably two. They're neck and neck with each other. But I'd say, you know, the first three major label debut albums are just fantastic. But when you listen to the rest of their catalog, you know, from 2002 to 2003, those albums, you know, you have And You and Deep Space Syndicate. Now, And You is going to be more of even more pop than anything. It's probably their poppiest album. This is still pop, but there are some rock elements. There's also a lot of different experimentation. So you can definitely tell that LaCroix is still one of these bands that always pretty much wanted to try something new and just push the envelope and just be different. And they wanted to set themselves apart from all the other Visual-kei bands in the scene at that time. So, overall, God, you know, with this album, overall, I'm giving this a solid. I'm kind of borrowing from the Darren Locke system at this point. Eventually I'll come up with my own system or my own methods or ways, but I'm kind of borrowing, you know, taking a nod to Darren. Like I said, as far as the review goes, I'm going to go ahead and give this a solid 3 majestic rings out of 5. Yes, that's 3 majestic rings out of 5 majestic rings. Yeah, it's still worth a listen. Go check it out if you want to pick a copy of it. I know that pretty sure there are copies of that album floating around somewhere. So until then, until next time, this is Steven, and I have been the Nostalgia-kei music observer, or music person. Thank you. Peace.